All right, good morning, everybody. I am here to give a presentation on from finding a tweet to closing a street, the revolution of digital storm reporting. I'm super excited to share some social media tips with everybody on this presentation today. To give a little bit of background, I have 6 years experience in emergency management on a local level. I've worked for cities and counties in Texas as well as in North Virginia. Most recently, I've been out in Maryland and also have been in the DC area. I've managed social media accounts at all of my positions, and so I'm really excited to share these tips today, and especially to share more than just public information, but actually pass along information to everybody about how to monitor social media for EOC needs, CITL needs, and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we will get it going shortly. All right. So I already gave a short introduction, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. I've got a lot of stuff that I really want to cover with everybody, and we want to make sure that we stay on time. So starting off with the concept of social media, and also the concept of community reporting. So our first response system and our emergency management system has relied on community reporting for a very long time. If we take a look at the root of how our first response system is actually set up, it requires somebody to see an incident and take an action to actually report the incident. So somebody sees an emergency going on, they take action, they pull out their cell phone, they call 911. That cell phone call goes to dispatch, where they ask questions to collect information from that person. And then obviously they dispatch out resources and help based on what that information was from that person. So our first response and our emergency system heavily relies on community reporting and passing on info. We can't start any of that process without somebody being proactive to report that information onto us. And also, the amount of information and the success of what that person passes on allows us to provide service. So depending on how good that information is, also relates to how well we can provide the service, pass on the resources, and things like that. So it's a very hand-in-hand process. And the public reporting process has been something that public safety as well as the meteorological community has been doing for a very long time. If we take a look at the weather industry, we have several different community reporting programs, such as Skywarn, Coco Ross, some formal observers who do observation stations for the Weather Service, as well as some really cool apps where people are constantly passing on information, just like those calls to dispatch. They're seeing severe weather, they're doing damage assessment, they're passing on all of that information to the Weather Service and to emergency management. And that has been a need for the weather industry for a very long time. On the first response side, we have the same thing. We have been working with the community to collect information from neighborhood watch programs, from tip lines, as well as arson lines, and even television shows such as America's Most Wanted and some other popular law enforcement shows that are on now. So why is this all important when we're talking about social media? Not only sending out information via social media, but also collecting information. It's important because we have learned in recent times that people don't call anymore. So originally, when we were talking about 911 systems and people trying to pass on information, whether it's Skywarn or whether it's just calling 911 or doing anything like that, people are less inclined now to actually pass on that information. And I have a really great example of when I was working in Leander Emergency Management Office of a tornado that we had, and this was actually shown to be true. So we actually had an EF1 tornado touch down in the middle of the city of Leander, just north of Austin. And believe it or not, they did put a warning on it, but the warning wasn't able to be issued for the first 20 minutes that the tornado was on the ground. Some of this had to do with the fact that it was hard to spot that on radar because it was such a small tornado, and also with radar scans and things like that, the Weather Service heavily relies on people to call and report and let them know, hey, there's a funnel or there's a touchdown, we need a tornado warning. So it kind of caught a lot of us off guard because we had this ongoing tornado that was actively doing damage for 20 minutes before we could get a tornado warning and be notified that that was occurring. And after we did the response, we were notified. We talked to residents, we did damage assessment and things like that. I wanted to check in and see if we had any kind of community reports from anybody, right? So I called dispatch, and nobody reported a tornado to dispatch. They did not call 911 to say there's a tornado, there's damage, nothing like that. I call NWS Austin and asked if they got any calls from any storm spotters or the community. And we were told that they did not. Nobody called NWS Austin, including any of their Skywarn folks. But when I researched social media and I went on to Twitter, Facebook, and all those things, we had people taking recordings of the tornado, saying there's a tornado, sharing information with their followers, their friends, and their family all over social media. So in short, it's pretty clear that people still do share what they see. They share community reporting, but they are not using phone lines to do it anymore. They are using social media. So technology really has changed us. It has allowed us to not only use social media for news, to collect news, but also disseminate news. But it has also taken over calling, and people actually prefer tweeting or commenting or even chatting with businesses and organizations over calling them. So in today's times, in 2023, because of that, social media really is expected among government agencies. Having a presence is expected, as well as passing along everyday information. Obviously, we have that shift of the technology that we're seeing. So like I said, people are more inclined to use social media nowadays for communication, for shopping, even dating, finding a partner, learning. So a lot of people use social media to find out webinars or find information on how to stay in their career field, kind of similar to this. Also just staying in the know, knowing what's going on in the world, expressing themselves. So because people are using social media for all of those things, it makes a lot of sense for them to use it for news and also just collection of information from the government and emergency management as well. With the shift of technology, we have seen the media heavily embrace this for all of their media operations. They use Twitter and social media to find story ideas. They use it to provide situation updates on stories they're either working on or information they're collecting. And honestly, when you talk to a lot of media people, especially PIOs who are trying to make those relationships, the media will actually tell you that they prefer social updates over coming out to you to talk to you or even calling you. If you could post a tweet and give an instant update on Twitter and be very thorough, they might just retweet your tweet, or they might write the story based on what you put in your social media post, and they might not feel like they need to call you at all. That can save a lot of time for a public information officer who might be swamped with a lot of other things. But it can also ensure that the right information is getting out at the right time initially, since they're very used to collecting information like that. Now, on top of the shift of technology, we also have the cord cutter movement. So it's important that we keep in mind that the old methods of getting information out just aren't really being used anymore. The newer generations and even the older generations want to save money in a time of economic challenge. So we see a lot of cord cutting, cable cutting, things like that. Also, like I said, we're so used to using social media, so I don't really feel like I need to go to TV when I can just follow all my news stuff and I can get 24/7 news on social media. On top of that, many of us live a very busy life nowadays, so it's hard for us to say that we're going to catch the 5, 6, or 10 o'clock news at home. So we're using social media to, once again, collect news on our pace when we're available to do so. And because of all of this, too, we've seen a lot of growth in freelance journalism, digital news companies, and independent reporting going on social media. So that's another method that people are actually using, especially to collect information on local happenings and things that might be happening in your neighborhood that maybe your local media or even national media isn't covering. And then lastly, like I kind of mentioned with media interface, the media do use it for conversations. So they like to have conversations with the public about ongoing events, obviously their stories and having discussions about how people might feel about certain stories or certain happenings of topics of interest. But in short, when people are looking for information, so maybe they're trying to find information on that disaster or that tornado that went through the town. Maybe they're trying to find information on the train derailment of what's going on. Or maybe it's even just a simple 911 call. They heard sirens, they saw a truck go by. They're trying to find out what's happening. People have been known to go directly to social media to look. I mean, that's where they're getting all their other information. And they have a lot of success usually in finding local updates. Many people have been known to look for the police department or the fire department. They go to the page, they see what you guys are saying on there, right? But if they go on social media and they type in the department page or whatever, and there's no update, or they can't find any of the agencies for the local government or whatever they're looking for, people will ask someone else. So maybe on social media, someone will post, hey, what's going on at this intersection? There's a bunch of police cars out there. Or I heard a lot of sirens last night and I heard an explosion. What happened? So they're putting out on social media these questions, and then they're trying to have people come to them to answer those. So it could be friends, it could be neighbors, it could be outside sources. So the issue of not being on social media actually leads to people trying to collect that information on social media from less authentic sources. So when they're going to their friends or they're going to other people, there's a huge chance they're going to get misinterpretations, rumors from what somebody thought they heard or thought happened. A lot of he said, she said kind of things, as well as perception. Someone might perceive something to be this way and say, well, I know it's this way. This is the answer, whatever. So in short, it is so important that agencies in emergency management and public safety are on social media so that your story, your incident, your agency happenings can be told by you. Because if you choose not to do any social media stuff and you say, we're not going to play that game, someone else on social media is going to try to tell your story for you, whether it's a blogger or a neighbor or a community member or something else. So we really want to empower ourselves to tell our own story so we make sure that we're getting the right information out to our communities that they need to know. So because of all of this, we are really forced to evolve and adapt into social media. And many public safety agencies around the country have been doing this already, right? Many are very active on Facebook, Twitter, Nextdoor, even a little bit of Snapchat. Obviously, we have newer platforms like Instagram and other things as well that people are trying to tap in. And then even the Citizen app that I have on the screen right now, which is a pretty cool way to have situational awareness of different dispatch calls and actual videos streamed by neighbors of the calls going on. So we can use social media to connect to the public. We can deliver information to them, but we can still collect that community information back that we used to get through call lines. We can use it to crowdsource and try to collect perceptions and information from people on an ongoing disaster response. We can also collect storm reports, which we're going to talk a lot more towards the end of the presentation on how we can use that in the EOC and really level up your situational awareness. And keep in mind, too, that your platforms and the success of it are really going to vary depending on your community. So we're going to talk a lot later on about how you can assess your demographics and how you are actually choosing social media to match what your community needs for communication, as opposed to just doing what might seem trendy. So like I mentioned, we want to tell our story. We want to shine the light on our agency. And this is really important to do during gray sky days with that incident information, but it's even more important to do it during the blue sky days. So how can we tell our story to our community on social media? We can have posts and content related to agency updates, telling the story of what emergency management is in your local or state community. What is some of the background of your agency? How can you share that on social media and educate people? Why does your agency exist? A lot of people don't know about emergency management and why their community might have one, or all of the really cool roles that we do in an EOC or behind the curtain. So we can use social media during blue sky days to try to educate on that. We can share our history. We can also highlight some of our really hard employees, right? Our hardworking employees who are doing all the work, kind of show them off to the community that way, as well as agency accomplishments and any kind of visibility or service to the community. All of those are really great ways to work to establish that bond with your community through digital means. That is really important, especially because we all know we can't be out in the community every day. So it's important to do that. Public education. So taking some of our community engagement and outreach to another level, pushing different preparedness information, alert systems, public information, local hazards. So doing a little education on what hazards we might be up against. And then once again, really focusing on emergency management basics. What should people be learning? What are some processes we can teach now so that if they have to shelter or they have to work with us after the disaster, they're going to be educated on it and not lost. And then finally, the incident information, which is really important. That's when the rubber meets the road during the disaster, and that information really has to get out. We want to provide notice of the incident, and we want to do so as fast as possible because we know that other people are going to try to beat that. Timing. We want to include the timing of the incident, the action to take, the resource help, aid processes, which is really important. So how can we better educate how people can get resources or aid, and also navigate some of those really tricky federal processes and that paperwork process that honestly is hard for even us to understand. And then lastly, just recovery information. So how can we shine our light? So we can do all of that through photos, videos, graphics, and then also we can limit using links. So starting with photos, any kind of opportunity that you can take photos out in the public or during operations or anything. People really like to see that. People are very visual, so they want to see the action shots. They want to see the behind the scenes. And the more of that you can do through your social media platform, you're actually going to build connections, but humanize your agency. And that's going to be really important during the disaster when people are scared. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of emotions. It's very easy to throw rocks at an agency if they don't feel like they're being served, if they don't have that relationship. But if you can humanize your agency, you're reminding them that there are people behind this agency that are working hard to protect others. Videos. So you can do interviews with staff. You can also do really cool, fun trends or anything that really fits the brand of your agency. You don't want to kind of do anything trendy that doesn't fit your brand or what you want to perceive to the public, because that's going to come off as kind of corny, or it's probably not going to hit the mark. But as an agency, you want to kind of establish how you want the community to see you. How can you connect with them and create fun trends or videos based on that. Some folks during COVID did really cool EOC tours or even educational information via video, because we could not do any physical tours. So people couldn't come in to see an EOC, or people couldn't come to the station. So really cool interactive videos with that are really popular, especially on video platforms. Graphics. So graphics are really helpful, and people are drawn to graphics as opposed to just reading your tweet or reading your text. So making sure graphics are interactive, visual, and easy to understand, and then also have that helpful information. And I think we're going to cover it later on, but if not, it is really important to make sure that you're also including accessibility. So you're doing your alt text on those graphics so that somebody can access what's on the graphics and they can read it through their screen readers and things like that. And then just as a brief point to bring up, people do not actually click links a lot. A lot of research has shown that I think 60% of folks do not click links. So if you're trying to deliver a lot of information via your website or something else, keep in mind that most people are just going to read the text in the post and your graphic, and they're going to move on. So you want to make sure that when you're doing that and you're crafting that information on social media, you're trying to include the most important information. So if they don't take the time to click the link, they have the best information that's going to help them. Now, keep in mind that public communication is a two-way street. So we talk a lot in public information training and stuff like that about top-down communication. So how are we delivering communication to the public about life safety, preparedness, education, all of those things? So from the government to the public. However, it is equally important to have that down-up communication. So how are people communicating their needs to us, or their questions, their confusions, their perceptions? So it's really important that we use social media for that. We read the comments, we engage and have discussions with the community and their questions. We do a lot of social listening, which is going to be monitoring social media to see what people are perceiving about the incident or the disaster. How are they understanding the calls of action? How are they spreading rumors, and how can we fix those things? If we don't participate in the down-up communication, we miss a huge amount of public information that we need to fix. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. And that was heavily shown in COVID, especially when, COVID safety stuff was changing so much. People were confused, obviously, about masks or no masks and all of that. And so monitoring that can really help steer your public information strategy on what additional information do you need to share with them? How can you clarify information? And how can you correct some of those rumors that might be going on that people are sharing? So to kind of start off our social media, how can we choose what platforms we need to be on? Many of us around the country work for very small offices. I know that when I was in Texas for a county, we only had 4 staff total. And it was a decent suburb. And then also when I worked for Lander, I was the only emergency manager under the fire chief. So I totally get it that we're all very busy. We have a lot on our plate. It's very hard to ask a lot of small offices to be able to take this on. So because of that, it's really important to make sure that we're choosing our social media platforms based on our community and what's going to be the most effective for the people you serve. So you can be active and really good on 1 or 2 platforms and still do the job. You don't have to be active on every platform. If you have the capacity to do that, that's awesome. But it's always best to kind of assess what works for you first. Keep in mind that one size does not fit all. So platforms are used for different things. People tend to want to see different things on different platforms, or they're using different platforms for different things. So you want to make sure to understand what the platform's being used for. And you want to develop the content based on that. You don't want to always just cross-post everything, because some photos and some things aren't going to work on everything. But before you choose that platform, you want to do that population analysis. What are your demographics? What's your typical age of the folks you serve? What are the different demographics, education, race, language, occupation? There's some really cool social media studies and data you can actually pull from the internet to show what people are currently on in your community. So if you have a huge Facebook community, then you definitely want to be on Facebook, right? Same with Instagram. Maybe Instagram is really popular and you are an emergency manager at a university. That might be a really great way to be able to reach that demographic that you're trying to serve. So after you do that population analysis, you can choose the platform, and you want to make sure that you're working to make that message meet them. So the message to be specific to them, localized to them and what they're looking for, relevant to them. And then also we want to use folk speak, or we want to speak like them. We don't necessarily want to be kind of that uppity government vibe or that uppity authoritative, because that might not connect with them on social media. Social media is more of a informal, right? So we want to talk like we're neighbors. We want to talk like we're buddies. It also helps build a better trust when they're reading some of our stuff. So taking a look at all these crazy platforms that we have now, as I mentioned before, we have different platforms for different things. So Facebook has been around for a while, but it very much is similar to kind of a bulletin board. People tend to use it as a bulletin board for events and different things they're looking for in their community. Facebook is set up to be a network of networks. So one person might have a lot of friends, and those friends share other friends' content to their feed. So it's kind of a network of networks. If I have a lot of well-connected friends to maybe public safety agencies, I'm able to actually capitalize off of that when they share that public safety agency posts, because I can see what they're sharing on my feed. Facebook is algorithm heavy, and it has been for a very long time. And that is kind of a disadvantage, because that means that if you don't have a community that is active with you, commenting a lot, liking your stuff, and then two, if you're not posting a lot, unfortunately, the algorithm, when you post that emergency post or that information they need, the algorithm is not going to show it to everybody. So they're only going to show it to people who are engaged with you a lot. And that's kind of an issue, because, if you have someone who just likes your page and then never likes anything again, they're not going to see that emergency information. So keep that in mind when you're using Facebook for emergency information as well. One of the coolest things about Facebook is kind of their movement towards community groups. So you might know about some of their neighborhood groups, or some of these little groups are trying to really build out to invest in local relationships. To get in those as a public safety agency, you usually have to request, and the neighborhood or the group has to let you in. But I will say, during storms and incidents and disasters, people are active in those groups. We had some flooding just outside of Baltimore County on the coastline that we were trying to manage last year. And, they were all sharing flooding information in that group. Now, luckily, we had some EOC staff who lived in the area and were a part of that group, because we weren't able to get our agency into that group. But it was really amazing what kind of information we could get in that group. And I really encouraged kind of putting the work in with that. And we're going to talk a little more about that in the future. Twitter. So Twitter's always been known as that breaking news app, right? The media have always kind of tended to go to Twitter. And then back in the day, before a lot of the recent changes, it had a very organized order structure. There wasn't a lot of algorithms, so you didn't see tweets or posts out of order a lot. It was very similar to like a news feed or a paper with headlines kind of approach. A lot of tweets would come out short and sweet, headline kind of stuff, before we had threads and things like that. And then also you could do hashtag sorting and things like that. Twitter's really good for response. And like I said, because the media heavily rely on monitoring Twitter to break news, it is essential to be on Twitter. Even if you do your community assessment or analysis and you don't have anyone on Twitter, your media is still on Twitter. So even if you just establish a Twitter to put out some of your agency updates or incident updates, that's going to help you with your media interface to make sure that, one, they're reporting on your incident, and two, they're reporting accurate stuff on your incident. Instagram. So Instagram is very much a platform of just pretty pictures. People tend to really like pretty picture and interesting picture content. And with recent changes, they're actually moving to doing videos, interactive videos, reels, things like that. But the goal of Instagram is to tell story with multimedia. So you're not really using a lot of text. You're not posting graphics or things like that. You're more trying to use photos and videos to tell a story and to engage. So a lot of fire departments recently have found a lot of success in recruitment by doing really cool training videos. If you tap into the hashtags, so you use a lot of common hashtags, you can actually increase your reach around the country, things like that. So it's really good for preparedness and agency rapport. It's less effective for incident messaging unless you have like a lot of community members on it. And then Nextdoor, obviously, it's very similar to a digital neighborhood watch. People join Nextdoor, you join your neighborhood, you get updates from people who live around you. You can post updates, events, and photos. And it's really helpful if you want to engage people who are typically community driven. So we were able to use it for some CERT outreach, and we had a lot of success with that. A lot of people signed up and came to our class. So getting into how we can use these platforms a little better. So like I mentioned before, Facebook is very similar to that bulletin board. So when we're looking at content, what can we put out? That department information. So sharing more about what my agency does. What projects are we working on? What are some initiatives we're doing? Those are some things we can put on Facebook. Safety outreach. So especially if you have a large amount of community members on Facebook, you want to make sure that you're doing your National Preparedness Month or any of your campaigns on Facebook geared towards them. Emergency information. So Facebook is still good to put emergency information out, despite the fact that you have algorithms and you also have some of the timeline challenges of getting it to people. With algorithms and with things, if you can get good engagement during the disaster, it's going to boost how many people see it, especially your followers. And then lastly, during COVID, we actually found that we had really good engagement on feel-good posts or community-driven posts. So showing volunteers giving out food at food distribution sites and kind of some of the positive messaging did really, really well during COVID on Facebook. So throwing in photos of that, doing stuff like that, that might be an idea for you. You want to be descriptive. You want to use graphics. Definitely graphics or pictures, and then use some emojis. Emojis kind of catch people's eye and can really drive someone to your post. Already kind of mentioned some of the issues like with the algorithm. Another really big issue with that out of order algorithm is the fact that if you post something that's old and you post again, there is still a chance that old post could show up at the top of someone's feed after you've posted something new. So something that I always do when I push severe weather watches and warnings is to make sure that we're putting timestamps, as you can see on the right-hand side. Putting the date and the time of the update is really helpful. Also, depending on your retention policy for your social media, you can go back and edit posts and put update, or you can put in the comments, update, or you can kind of try to link to it. But either way, you just want to keep in mind that Facebook could potentially still give old updates to people. So you want to try to redirect them to the new updates as best as you can. So there have been quite a bit of platform changes with Facebook, especially over the past 5 to 10 years. From my observations, it can be a little hard to catch up with. I know they've changed their look and how they allow page management quite a bit. And so it can be a challenge to understand, where should I post this? Should this be a story? Should this be on my feed? Should I put this in groups? These are things that it's always best to kind of do some research now before you're going to be doing any incident posts so you can figure out exactly where you want to put that. They've also released the Meta Business Suite, which is how a lot of folks can actually manage their agency post scheduling, their content, things like that. Once again, if you're not super active in the business suite, it's going to be hard for you to kind of understand where things are. So definitely take some time to look at that. And then one of the other issues that we've seen over the past few years, especially in COVID, was the mass exodus of accounts. So a lot of people were upset about things like visibility, security, also monitoring of their activity and privacy. So a lot of people quit Facebook. So if you have a mass exodus of your community leaving Facebook, then Facebook might not necessarily be as helpful to you as it was before. So it's important to do those demographics. And then lastly, misinformation, because we covered a lot of the algorithm stuff already. Obviously, we have to struggle a lot with not having access to those Facebook groups. And so as an agency, if you can't get into those groups and if you can't correct information in those groups, you can't see what's being said, it's going to be very hard to try to correct some of that. Another issue that we're kind of going to have to wrangle with is a little bit of the pushback for government access to information, which has to do with some of the data and security issues. So data is not as openly accessible to government as it used to be on social media. So we have to keep that in mind when we're trying to collect information. Twitter. So as we talked about, Twitter is all about headlines. It's about using threads to post multiple updates in one tweet. And then it's also about trying to get information out about departments as well as your outreach tidbits. So the biggest issues with Twitter, before we get into some of the updated information on the next slide, is the character limits. So we have to be short and concise when we're trying to get information out about incidents. They are expanding characters, so it's a little better than it used to be, but it can still be pretty tough when you have a big incident that you want to put road names and everything else in there. Another issue for community messaging is the lack of popularity. So a lot of folks in metro and urban areas use Twitter quite a bit as opposed to more rural environments. So it might not necessarily be good to get community messaging out. However, I want to emphasize that for the media, it is very good because the media are using it, like we said. And if you can get your message to the media, then they mass disseminate your information via TV, their website, their apps, their stuff. So they're amplifying all of your stuff. Something cool that you can do to provide updates, like threads, to where you can post a thread and you run out of characters and then you hit comment or tweet again and you post multiple tweets in one thread so people can read it all together. It's not all spread out. You can also do a quote tweet like you see on the screen, where we were putting out a call about a pretty big gas main break, and we decided to do a quote tweet with an update. So people saw the original post that we had with the information, and then we provided an update to try to make sure that that was getting out to them. That's just another way that you can try to combat people seeing those original posts and not necessarily seeing updates. Personally, I'm a huge fan of doing the actual threads where you're just providing the information updates on one giant tweet connected. So let's talk a little bit about the platform changes. And this has been a very confusing thing, I think, for a lot of public information officers and a lot of folks really in government trying to figure out all the changes, the rumors, trying to correct information about how Twitter is changing. So obviously we have a lot of different changes from the ownership transferring over to Musk. One of those would be that we used to have an ability to see the latest tweets and your home, and now it's following and for you. So you have two different tabs that you have to get used to. One is more about recommendations, which is what the for you is for. The following is what your account is following. That can be pretty tricky because it removed the latest tweets, which kind of hurts your ability to look at what's coming out in that timeline order. So it kind of takes away one of the benefits that Twitter used to have, which was an orderly timeline of things as they developed. Obviously, one of the biggest issues that we have is the removal of the Twitter verification process, or the blue check mark, I like to call it. That is now known as Twitter Blue, where people can pay to have that. It does not automatically mean that somebody is an official account anymore. So there's going to be a little confusion in that, and people trying to figure out who's a real account, who paid for this, things like that. I do know in some of the research regarding the verification that Twitter Blue is something that you can pay for, but there are other options, including the gold check mark and the gray check mark. The gray check mark is actually a government verification process that government accounts can apply for. And if they are given the gray check mark, it is free. So you do not have to pay for the gray check mark as of now. I can't promise that they're going to not change that or change that, because they've been changing things and throwing information around forever. But I did want to let all the agency folks know that that gray check mark is possible and it's free. The gold is for private and business. So that verification process costs money. So there is a difference. I will say I did see one of the land management accounts ran by the state of Oregon yesterday say that their gray was rejected. So they were not able to get their government verification approved. So that is a little concerning as well. So hopefully we'll get more information about some of these verification processes and what government accounts are allowed to do it. For now, if you have a government account, I would just totally throw my account in there and see if I could get that verification, because it's going to help you be able to establish that you are a official account. And then lastly, we have a lot of the misinformation and disinformation control issues as well. And to be honest, a lot of the verification system transition, the changes, the swaps, the lack of official information updates from Twitter have really muddied the water. So we just have a lot of just confusion with what's going on the platform. We also have kind of a fight against bots. So Elon Musk has claimed that some of these processes are going to prevent bots or reduce bots, which typically can be bought and can be used to disseminate misinformation. That's kind of a question mark, so we're going to see if that helps or not. And then also, we do have a little bit of bad PR with Twitter right now. A lot of people are leaving Twitter. So you might want to check with your community and check your following and see how many people are still there, because it might not be as valuable as it was before Elon purchased it. Nextdoor. So we already talked a little bit about using it for a community forum. So providing volunteer opportunities, putting out CERT classes, having people register. A really cool thing I wanted to talk about is the alert feature. So you can actually send an alert on Nextdoor where everyone in the community will get your alert. It comes out, I think, in like red text or something on their feed, and it informs them just like kind of any other alert. You can put water emergencies out. You can put any kind of emergency information that way, and it will reach people more than if you're just doing a agency post on Nextdoor. So if you haven't used Nextdoor, or you haven't checked out the alert feature, that is a newer thing, definitely go on there and figure out how you can utilize that during utility outages or incidents. One of the biggest issues lately with Nextdoor have been community tone, and we're going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But also how notifications are really limited. So when Nextdoor first rolled out, it was really easy to hit all those community folks. Now you have to kind of follow that public safety account to be able to receive some of their everyday posts. So we have struggled a little bit with trying to get a lot of people to see our posts, because it's almost turned a little bit more into like Facebook, where they have to choose to like us and choose to get our stuff, as opposed to just getting it automatically. So new challenges that we've had, talking about tone of engagement. So COVID-19 really changed the tone that was seen on Nextdoor. There is quite a bit of just not good vibes on Nextdoor nowadays. There's a lot of harassment, and also reporting other people really increased during COVID. Also, to kind of fight some of these issues that were going on, Nextdoor was deleting comments if they were misinformation, or they were trying to help out with some of the COVID issues that we had, but they were not making it clear that Nextdoor was removing those. So on one of our COVID posts, we had people from our community commenting on it. Nextdoor was deleting it and not telling us. And then our community said, you are censoring us because you are deleting our comments. And we were like, no. So I found that to be a huge issue that you really need to keep in mind of, because it could really hurt your trust if Nextdoor is deleting comments for you and it kind of looks like your agency is deleting it. Lastly, just information monitoring. So having access to individual neighborhood groups, kind of similar to Facebook. When you use Nextdoor, you're pushing information out and you're collecting information how they comment. But you're not able to actually get in the neighborhood. So you're missing that opportunity. And then Instagram. So I'm going to cover a little Instagram. Like I mentioned before, using it for photos, Reels, really, really popular right now. So popular that a lot of the other accounts like Facebook and other platforms want to have something similar. Very trendy, and you can really maximize your reach with hashtags and build that preparedness and agency rapport like we talked about before. And I kind of just want to touch on some of the new challenges here. So with Instagram, there are a little bit of challenges in the fact that Facebook purchased it and it's affiliated now. So any Facebook backlash or changes could be transferred to Instagram, and people could potentially not like that. Also, it's really important to understand Instagram challenges and trends before participating. Um, you never want to just blindly follow something and not know why it's being done. It could really get you in hot water. So make sure that you're doing that. Also, connecting with the audience correctly. So being able to post what the audience is looking for, as well as understanding all the design options. So a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with text and text size and color. It can be very overwhelming. So taking some time to just kind of set a standard on how you want to do Instagram. TikTok. So TikTok is extremely popular. A lot of people are relying on it, and they're actually getting information from it about different things, disasters and things like that. However, we're all pretty aware that there is that information security concern. And with that, a lot of governments have restricted having TikTok on any kind of OIT or government device in over half of the states in the country. So if you're in one of those states, obviously, you cannot use it. And that means also, even if you don't have an account, you can't monitor it. So if people are spreading rumors or things like that, it's going to be very hard to be able to know what they're saying because you can't have it on your device. And in the future, there's a lot of question marks too, because if everybody potentially goes to TikTok and they drop Instagram or they drop anything else, we really have to ask how we're going to be sending information out to those people. How can we connect to them? How can we learn what they're trying to say? And then Snapchat, obviously, it's really cool to use for monitoring. So you can actually get into Snapchat. You can take a look at information that's being shared. So you do not need an account to do that. You can actually pull up on web and Google Snapchat map, and you can pull up all of these really cool reports. The screenshot is actually from Hurricane Harvey. So I was able to collect different information during the Harvey response of people sharing public Snapchats to the Snapchat map on the web version. So we've talked a lot today about building social media and sending stuff out and looking at comments and interacting. But we do know there are a lot of people that either don't know what EM is and don't follow us, or they're not connected to us. So they're not going to send or call or post their report to us. So when people don't do that, we can still use social media to gather that information through something called a virtual operations support team, or a VOST. So VOST are basically these teams of volunteers that we train in hunting on social media, digging up reports, looking at hashtags, vetting information, and then they deliver it to us, either in the planning section, maybe as a part of your JIC, wherever you want to put them to collect that information from social media. These teams have been used both with the National Weather Service, but have also been used with different emergency management operations to assist with storm warning operations. Like if they were to find the land or tornado video and get it to the Weather Service so they could put the warning out faster. They also assist in storm report collection. So for damage assessment, not only for Weather Service, but also for our needs. And then also needs assessment. So finding what people are saying that they need, and realizing that we have a lot of structural damage, or we need shelters, or things like that. It's really easy to put together a VOST. You really only need a handful of volunteers. Some folks will collect volunteers from maybe your local Skywarn program, because we do a lot of weather monitoring. Other folks have been known to do a VOST team through their CERT, or their local disaster volunteer organized team of whatever you do for your jurisdiction. It's really easy to do, and you really honestly don't need a lot. You can do a VOST with 3 people, you can do it with 5 people, 10 people, however big you want to make it to monitor that. With your volunteers, you want to make sure that you have a team lead, and then you also want to make sure that you're providing training in social media, because they're going to be on social media looking for those reports for you. Weather training is a plus too, because you want to make sure that they understand funnel clouds and the differences in hail size and things like that, so they can confirm information. And then also, you just want to make sure that you have a method of communication between your VOST team and your EOC. VOST methods, we're going to go through this slide pretty quick because I've only got about 10 minutes and I want to leave 5 minutes for questions. But you can use Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and even personal reports to collect for your VOST. On Facebook, you can check out those neighborhood groups. Maybe you can establish trust with your VOST team and their VOST account and get them into those neighborhood groups so they can collect that info for your EOC. They can dig on news media posts. Something that I've learned is a lot of people take pictures of storm damage and they want to be on the news, so they will actually comment to their favorite meteorologist on Facebook and share, this is my house at this address. So you can collect a lot of storm reports by just going to media posts and reading comments and seeing what people are saying. Twitter is really cool because you can actually use geocode locations, word strings, and also TweetDeck to search for all tweets that have certain keywords that are in a certain radius, and then also are for a certain thing. So as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, you can actually stick that in Twitter, and Twitter will find all tweets with any of those keywords within 10 kilometers of Towson, Maryland. So that's a really cool way to look on Twitter, especially to monitor media, maybe reporting, but also if anyone's sharing storm reports. And then we've already talked a little bit about a Snapchat map. So collection of social media is really important, but it's even more important to make sure that we're vetting, because we know false information is on social media. One of the biggest issues we've seen is photoshopped tornadoes or photoshopped storms. So these pictures on the screen are actually fake. So you don't want to collect that and say, oh, there's a shark swimming down the highway, when there's really not. You want to make sure to vet it. We also have issues with people taking old tornadoes, old floods, old things, and actually sharing them like it's new. So that's another issue, is we don't want to just automatically say, oh, I found a tornado post, there's a tornado, when it was really the tornado from 2011 that hit the town. We can do this vetting, and we can train our VOS volunteers through tools such as TinEye or even reverse Google images. So having volunteers find photos, run them through TinEye, which is a free service, seeing that they're not old posts, and then passing that on is really important. This is just kind of a basic overview of what your VOS team structure could look like. So you've got a handful of volunteers who report to a team lead, and then that team lead would connect with not only the weather service, but your emergency management office, however you choose. Might be good in the planning section, might be good in your JIC. Maybe if you have a watch office, or even if you just have somebody who's a duty officer, you might want to make them report to them, or report their information to them as well if you don't have EOC currently running. And then I only got a couple more minutes, so I'm going to be kind of brief with this, but how do these reports actually impact our operations? How can we utilize these to do our job better? Basically, we're able to assess the situation better. We have better intel, better situational awareness. We can lean forward, take more preventative action or proactive action. And when we do those things, we might be able to prevent calls for service. You know, if I find a flooded road tweet and I close the road, that's going to be less swift water rescue calls that my fire department's going to have to go on. So not only am I reducing call volume and solving problems before they happen, I also might even be protecting first responders by eliminating some of the calls that they would have to go to, but I was able to be proactive and throw resources at something because of information I found on social media. EM decisions we could make with VOS and just social media listening and collection. We might be able to set up damage assessment faster, right? We might be able to actually plan damage assessment locations better, rather than just kind of sending someone out to do windshield assessment everywhere. We can collect information and be a little more planned with that. We can consider if we need a shelter faster, rather than waiting for someone to call and say, hey, I don't have a house. You know, we might be able to take a look at the damage and establish that. We could also consider other resource needs. In terms of flooding, like I mentioned, closing roads, determining evacuation, public warning, and then even for icing, once again, closing roads, but confirming with our fire department, are these roads going to be possible for you to actually go out on for calls? Are you going to have to change your call response based on the icing, which actually happens quite a bit in Texas as opposed to Maryland? But it is just very helpful to have that situational awareness to drive a lot of those actions that we're doing. Utilities, kind of a similar thing. So being able to actually realize that you might have water, electricity, or gas interruptions if people are posting about it. Kind of determining the scope from that, but also correcting misinformation about utilities, using that to determine what kind of resources you need to provide to people, things like that. And then just to wrap up real quick, just have a few examples. So we've used boss teams and situational awareness for things like protests, discovering threats to the protest, estimating attendance, and then also finding when we would have national media interest and arrival at protests. We've used it for a variety of different things for severe weather, like finding storm damage, planning damage assessment, discovering that the media was actually going to go out to the damage. So we were able to put our PIO in route to meet them rather than them not having any kind of call or interaction before that. We were able to use it for a water crisis that we had where we had a multi-day, I think over like 1 million people under a boil water advisory. And we had a lot of perception issues with that, as well as water storage issues. So we were able to assess that from social media. And then we have used it quite a bit for flooding events. So closing low water crossings and things like that. So in short, how do you do all this? You just want to reach out to your community. You want to start building that community, have a platform, engage, build that volunteer team, really helpful. And be present because you don't want to just have an account that sits there until you have an emergency. But with that, I want to thank y'all for giving me the hour to talk about social media. It's definitely something I'm super passionate about. So if you have any questions or if you want me to share any of my information on Boss or anything like that, you can email me at my project email. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. But that is all I have.
Hey, Ashley, thank you so much. For everyone who was in this session, we had a little glitch at the beginning, so I was actually supposed to do an introduction to Ashley and to this session. And Ashley, you recovered beautifully, so very well done. But there are a lot of questions in the Q&A, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So, we can try and answer them offline, or, if you have other things that we haven't, Ashley hasn't been able to answer, you can reach out to her directly. But one of the questions at the very top is if you could share where people can find some of that information about which social media platforms are used in their communities.
Yeah, so when I usually first start, I actually just do demographic assessment, which we usually have to do for EM for a lot of stuff. So census data, what's the age demographic? How do people work in your community? All those things. Trying to put that together. And then 2, like I said, I don't have any specific names off the top of my head, but if you Google like social media usage, you can actually find like those studies in locations that might help you determine whether or not you have different platforms. And lastly, some of it's a little bit of experiment. So you might start with like Facebook, which is pretty popular, and then start to look at your analytics to see how many people are really engaged in it.
Awesome, thanks. So requires a little bit of research and a little bit of digging. So this question is kind of a little bit random, and it's from me. Do you have a favorite social media account that you follow?
Oh, that's hard. So for obviously like EOC agency stuff, I just think that it's really important to try to follow as many like weather service stuff, weather intel stuff. stuff like that. I have so many favorites, but I actually will make lists and follow lists and follow multiple people because you want to have everybody in that feed to help you with all that information collection. It's been really helpful.
Awesome. That's a really great tip. Okay, well, we are at time. So, Ashley, thank you so much. There's a really engaging chat, and we really appreciate your knowledge and expertise on this. And I believe next up in this stage is going to be space weather events, which is a very popular topic among my staff once they discovered that it was a thing. So thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the training today.
Yeah, thank you for being here.